Well, hey, thank you so much for clicking on this video today. If we haven't met before, my name is Jean-Michel, and we're talking today about who God says women are. There's so many thoughts all over the place, especially in the society that we come from, in the culture that we live. So many conversations about gender, so many conversations about equality, about men and women, and what does all of that mean? And I'm just thinking out there for those of you who are questioning, those of you who are Christians, those of you who are just trying to live your life in a way that honors God and brings life to others. How do we have these conversations, and what does it mean for us? And that's exactly what we're doing. And today is just the beginning of a conversation, but we want to talk a little bit about who God says women are and what that means for us as a church. So here we go. So looking over the history of humanity, right? That's a big, massive, long story. And especially in the culture that we live, I think it's pretty plain to see that women have not always had the fairest and most equal of rights in societies. Now, that's a huge topic, and it's one that can be debated in many ways. And we're not going to do that so much today. But I think we can all agree that there are moments within our own culture, within our own society, and even to this day, where women are, in a word, oppressed, or in a word, held back in one way, shape, or another. I think about even the realities of wage gaps and positions of authority and power in the world, even in the church. It's a question that we all need to ask ourselves: is this normal? Is it the way that it's supposed to be, or is there a reason behind it? But either way, I think we can agree on this one thing, that whoever you are, you should have the opportunity to be who you want to be. And especially more than that, to be who God has called you to be. There should be nothing that stops you from that, nothing that gets in the way. And so this is the foundation that we're talking about. You look back in history, you will find times in history where women 100% have been oppressed by men. And I ask the question, why? Why does this exist in our human nature, and why does it exist in our world? It's something we need to engage with and see, is this the way God created it, or is there something more than this? We look at God's original design, right? And we can look in the book of Genesis. You know, if you've been a Christian a long time, you know exactly what it is. Or maybe you are new to the faith or just questioning. Genesis is the first book in the Bible. It is not the oldest book in the Bible, but it tells the story of the creation of humanity. And it's a beautiful picture of God coming to teach us and to show us where we come from and how we got the way that we are. And there's this really interesting moment. It's a famous story. There's this couple called Adam and Eve, and they are the representation of all humanity, and they're in the garden. This couple, humanity, disobeyed God, and they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's a famous story, and it's called the fall, a moment where humanity disobeys God and sin enters the world. Disobedience comes in. After this moment, there's a curse that is pronounced on the earth. If you know the story, there's a curse that is pronounced on the snake. There's a curse that's pronounced on Adam, and right in between those two things, there is a curse that's pronounced on the woman. Her name is not yet Eve. She hasn't been given the name Eve. She is just woman. And this helps us understand that the writers were trying to help us see this is not just specifically this one woman, Eve. This is actually all women. And in fact, it goes a lot deeper than that. But very specifically to this woman is pronounced this specific part of the curse. It says that your desire will be for your husband, speaking now to the woman, to Adam, right? But he will rule over you. It's such an interesting set of scriptures, just such an interesting interaction between God and humanity, that woman's desire will be for the betterment of man, the betterment of everyone around them, but it will be given for men to rule over them. This is huge, and we see this outplaying in our world, men dominating over women. And this is not actually part of God's design. This is part of what we call the curse, the fall of humanity, the brokenness of humankind. And I think, again, we can all agree on that when the fallen nature of humanity comes out, all kinds of brokenness comes out, including the domination of men over women in an unequal society. We can also see that this is not part of God's original design, but in fact part of the curse. So what was God's original design? Well, to see that, we go a few verses before and we see where woman comes to be. And it's this moment, again, it's quite famous, where God puts the man to sleep and he takes a part of his side. He takes a part of Adam. And sometimes that's translated rib, but it also means a part of, or the side of Adam out. And he creates Eve and he creates woman. Now, it's so interesting. We need to look at the words here. And the whole episode is prefaced by this idea. God says, he looks at Adam, he looks at man, and he says, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make for him a helper or a helpmate. And this is where English sometimes lets us down when we're talking about the Bible. Because that word helper or helpmate in our language often denotes someone who is subservient. Not necessarily always subservient, but not always someone who is equal. When we have a helper, usually there is a master and an apprentice, or there is someone who is doing the work and someone who is helping to do the work. It's almost like someone who comes maybe alongside, but oftentimes in a subservient role. And this has influenced the way that men have looked at women over many, many years, right? It's just the reality. But we need to look at what this word actually means to really see God's original intent and his original design. And so the word that's used there, that's translated helper, is actually the word EZER, E-Z-E-R, EZER. And it's a very specific word in ancient Hebrew. It actually does not mean someone who is subservient, and yes, it is someone who helps, but not in a subservient way. It's actually the word for protector, provider, rescuer, savior. It is a massive, important, and powerful word. When God uses the word EZER, he means someone who is powerful, not someone who is subservient. And this word is actually used 21 times in the Old Testament. 2 of those occasions are where God refers to the woman, to Eve, where he says she is an EZER. I will make for the man an EZER. He's talking about the woman. He's talking about Eve. 3 other occasions actually come from the nation of Israel. And there are big, powerful nations that through military power aid and rescue Israel. The other 16 times that this word is used in the Old Testament, it is actually referring to God himself for the nation of Israel, and by extension for you and me. That is huge for 2 reasons. The first reason is that God never refers to a man as an EZER. The second is that he refers to Eve and to himself as EZER. This is huge, and this is something that just blows my mind every time I think about it. That God, when he says, I will make a helper, an EZER for man, he's referring to woman in the way that he refers to himself for his people. And we don't see God as subservient to us. We don't see him kind of bowing to our whims and our thoughts. No, we listen to God. He rescues us. He provides for us. He leads and guides us. And yet this is the word he chooses to use for woman when speaking about man. That is huge. And that honestly flips on its head the way that we usually think about men and women's roles. In fact, we see men in positions of power and influence. We see women as subservient in so many ways. And, maybe it's better in our culture, but it hasn't been that way over the recent history, right? But in fact, in God's original design, he placed a huge role on the shoulders of women. This word EZER, protector, provider, source of wisdom and guidance, rescuer. It's everything that we need as men comes from women. And in fact, we cannot do everything that God has called us to do without the woman that God places in our lives. In the same way that we cannot live without God protecting and providing for us, in the same way, this is a relationship that God has set up between men and women. And I think that is huge. As men, we need to deal with this. We need to understand this, that we are not above women. And honestly, they are not above us either. But in fact, we are equals, two halves of an amazing whole that God has put together. This is huge, and it should inform the way that we look at each other. It should inform the way husbands look at wives. It should inform the way that wives look at husbands. We are not two people who should fight each other. That's what the curse brings. But what God brings is unity. And when we walk in our roles, we see the fullness of God. An amazing picture. This word EZER, referring only ever to God or to woman. Massive and beautiful. Massive and beautiful. And so what does this mean for men and for women? Well, firstly, for men, this must show you that men are not above women. We are not somehow created to be the leaders and the ones in charge, and women are there created to support us. That's not the way God designed things. Now, it's important to say that there is a godly leadership role that's placed on the heads of men. And we can go deeper into this. We will go deeper into these conversations. It's important for men to know who God has made you to be. Ultimately, God put the responsibility of his family on Adam. And by extension, he puts that same responsibility on us. And we need to live out that responsibility. But it's important to state that that doesn't make us more important, and it doesn't give us the right to dominate over our wives or the women in our lives in any way, shape, or form, because we are not above women. We are equal. This means that not only can you, but you actually should listen to the wisdom coming out of your spouse, your wife, or the woman in your life, maybe even in your workplace. Man, God has placed a special kind of wisdom and a special kind of provision on women that we need in our lives. We should be ready to welcome advice, welcome the wisdom that comes our way, because it's going to help us be who God has made us to be. And we can let the women in our lives be who God has called them to be. Empower them, not suppress them, but empower them into those positions of influence, not only in our personal lives, but even in our workplaces, even in our churches, to see the fullness of who God has called them to be come to pass. And that's a challenge to every one of us, to not just take the influence God has given us and lift ourselves up and lift other men up, but to actually look at the individual call on both men and women and raise them up into the positions that God has called them to be. I believe that that's the way God designed it, and I believe that that is beautiful. Now, having said that, for women, what does this EZER thing mean for you? Well, first and foremost, I have to say the same thing to you. It does not place you above men, but right there alongside men in the role you were called to be. And so I want to say this to you. Know who you are. It doesn't matter what men have said to you. It doesn't matter what your father or your brothers or what the men in your life have said to you, teachers and people, bosses who have pushed you down. Come on, you are made in the image of God, and you are powerful, you are strong, you are wise, you are together, you are organized, and you have something to offer that no one else has. And I don't mean this in some kind of motivational way. I mean this in a real way. You have something to offer that no one else has. So know who you are and be strong in it. You are the EZER to your husband. It means that, number one, you have access to him that no one else has. It means that your words and what you say can either really build up or really destroy someone. And you got to be careful. You have to be intentional with the wisdom God has given you. But as you wield it for his glory and for his plan, man, it's amazing what God will do through you. I know that it's not always an easy road, especially in the different societies. I don't know where you're watching from right now. Maybe in your family, it's not okay for women to be leaders. It's not okay for women even to speak above men. There are even societies in this world where there aren't equal rights at all. Women are not allowed to drive or vote or have a say above their husbands. That's the reality of the world we live in. But I want you to know that God knows you. He's with you. And even in the hardest moments, He is going to use you to bring life where you are. And here's the final word today. As followers of Jesus, we should be always seeking to bring the best to the world around us. That means that to the women in our lives, men, we should be building them up. We should be placing them in positions of authority where God has put them, listening to what they have to say and not being afraid of who women are. They are strong and powerful, just like men are strong and powerful. There's so much that God wants to do through us and through the church if we will live the way that He designed us to live. I want us to get out of each other's way, to stop putting barriers in front of each other, and to really seek God to make us influential in our communities, in our societies, to let the church be that influential, beautiful bride of Christ that brings the love of God and the light of Christ into the world. And so I want to say to every one of us, let's be open. Let's be open-minded to who God says that we are. Men, you are leaders. You are strong and you have a lot to offer. But you can't do it without your EZER. God has specially made men and women to work together, both in marriages, in workplaces, even in the church. We are to work together as a team, shining the beautiful light of Christ through our unity. That's who God's made us to be. But we're not here to conform to the pattern of this world, a pattern of domination, a pattern of putting people down. But we actually are transformed by the renewing of our mind. Our minds are renewed on the Word of God. And so as we get to know who we are and who God has made us to be, we can flow in that space. And so today, I hope that this has spoken to you. You're welcome to comment down below and let's have the conversation. Let's talk back and forth. But I really believe that as we step into who God has made us to be, both men and women stepping into their calls, into their roles, it's going to bring a beautiful change to our lives and to our communities. And so thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. We really appreciate it. If you've enjoyed it, you're welcome to like, maybe even subscribe to our channel and come on the journey with us. Maybe even join us for a service. We're online and in person every Sunday, 9 a.m. We're in the Waterfall area in Johannesburg. And so we would love to connect with you. Come have a coffee and let's have a conversation. But thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again soon.